over to you, Ram, for moderating the upcoming 30 minutes. Ram, can you hear me okay?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another live stream hosted by the wonderful folks at AccuKnox. My name is Ram, and I am tasked with hosting this wonderful session today with someone as nice as Gaurav. The event should just host itself. I've known a lot of people from AccuKnox, and I'm yet to meet somebody who's not very competent, who's very mediocre, who kind of only knows a little bit of what they're doing and things like that. But that's yet to happen. Uh, Gaurav is a product manager at AccuKnox. He's been doing security stuff wonderfully there. Hi, Gaurav. Welcome to the stream.
Sorry about my voice. I think you put the bar too high. So, thank you.
No, it reminds me. So whenever I'm looking at security slides and attackers and things like that, one of the first things that comes to my mind is one of those old Wix advertisement where there's like a tiny germ that attacks people. And I was just looking at the slides earlier today and thinking about that. And very ironically, you seem to have lost your voice. I wish I could hand you some of those Wix, and you just do that and you get it back as if by magic. But uh, you know that's just wishful thinking. But uh, great to have you here. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit before we go on with the show?
Yeah, given my voice, I'll keep it brief. I'm working as a product manager, like Ram you said, and hoping this session will be insightful for everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Kubernetes, I think, is a topic of interest for a lot of people. Everybody seems to know how to get different applications on there. Some people seem to know how to do services and manage networking, but very few people seem to know how to keep things secure. So that's been my experience in talking to a lot of folks in the community, not just here locally in India, but also whenever I have the chance to travel. A lot of people just focus on application development and deployments, but not a lot of people are talking about workload security. And that's one of the reasons I was very excited for the session today, which is bang on focused on workload security, especially in the Kubernetes realm. So why don't you kick us off, Gaurav? And I'm very eager and excited to hear what you have to share.
Thank you, Ram. Yeah, let's dive into it, and let me know if you have any questions. Let's keep it interactive. So we will begin by introduction, something about container and cluster protection, how Equinox simplifies security tooling, some of the major issues that we see out there, and what do we generally mean when we say workload security? What are the things involved? Why SDLC is kind of a picture that we also cannot let go of while talking about workload or application security. What is the differentiation that Equinox brings to the table, forensics, threat analytics, and end up with some kind of use cases and some thought-provoking questions as well, if the session goes well. So can we go to the next slide? So Equinox as a platform, I think it has been said before also, if we are keeping abreast of Ram's podcasts or webinars. We are a platform company, which means that we like to have the security coverage for an organization, which can be spanning from your application to the infrastructure involved, all from one platform. And we focus more on automation prioritization. We really understand that the security is very contextual. So if you have a lot of platform, the communication is always a challenge. The security is always the one to take a hit. Now, what we mean by that is How you develop the application is one thing, how you ship the application and then run the applications, all has to be looked at from one lens. The risk assessment, the runtime protection, all has to append, or you can say feedback into each other to give the contextual understanding. AI security is also another kind of workload which we will be talking about. But interesting to understand that whenever we say AI, it does not mean AI only. It is AI specific and AI related. When we say AI related, that also underlines the infrastructure and the application it is interacting with. Now, that is the overall posture, or you can say the take of AccuKnox as a company. And we have different, you can say, modules for specific product offerings. These are generally Gartner defined, but what we are trying to say is from code to runtime and the infrastructure like public cloud, private cloud, and the AI security, all of that from one platform. Let's go to the next slide. Now, like we have said earlier, AccuKnox really believes in having a platform play, but all of that is nothing when we are not able to have a customer success with that, which means that we need to have a way to do better triaging. We need to be outcome driven, not just security, you can say scans driven. By outcome, I mean to say that we should have a findings life cycle, ability to auto ticket, ability to automate, ability to prioritize, ability to do a AI assisted remediation to attend to the issues quick in a quick fashion. All of that is quintessential for any enterprise platform who is a security platform. Now, all of that is an enterprise play, which is mentioned there, but I really wanted to focus on having automation, rules engine based, and AI assisted remediation as the key takeaway from this slide. Any questions, or we can be good to move forward.
No, let's push along.
Okay. Okay. Now talking about workload issues, we need to understand that the containers, how they are built, like in the Docker itself, there can be security misconfigurations. You also can have some kind of embedded secrets in those Docker file. You can also have some kind of crypto mining related things there. When your applications are actually shipped and it is running in any kind of production environment, it can have any kind of containers rogue uh, related attack, which means that one container which is uh, taken advantage to do a lateral movement into other containers of significant importance, credential theft, execution of malware at runtime, all of that are difficult problem. We all know that what happened with Log4j. It was all basically our ability to respond to such zero-day attacks at runtime that we are what vouching for. And that is where AccuKnox started. Focus on runtime security, focus on zero trust application security. We'll talk more about that, but you need to understand that even before containers images are built, they are coded somewhere. Those part also comes as a part of AppSec security, like SaaS DAST. We'll also talk about that. That is also very, very important from the application security perspective. Now, when you see modern attacks, it can be Hildegard attack, it can be crypto mining attack, it can be, uh, you know, maybe Log4j, SolarWinds, all of that, and some of the sophisticated attacks like which are directed to kernel exploits. Your runtime security solution should also have an understanding to that. Typically, what we hear in the industry is zero trust network access. That's never enough. When we have to look at the application security, we'll have to look at in different layers. And that's where we are trying to point out that kernel level exploit is also important. And yeah, and there are other things also like access controls. We all know that Kubernetes identities can be complex. And that is what we also want to handle from the Kubernetes security or container security perspective. Now, one of the fundamental problem is we have a detect and respond model in runtime security. It's a very flawed approach. We'll talk about that, which is fifth point. The sixth point is talking about how today in any pod, you can execute any process and there is unrestricted access for any process. We need to actually go to a least permissive posture, and that is what we are calling out here. And the last but not the least is ability to conform to techniques and tactics procedure by MITRE attack framework. And we have a really good solution that can not only do detection but prevention from these different kind of attack scenarios outlined by MITRE and NEST and others. Let's move forward to the next slide. So workloads. Workloads could be in the shape of your containers, your Kubernetes, VM, bare metal, Docker container, all of that. It can also be KubeVirt. It can also be any other virtualized environment. So what we are trying to say is AccuKnox has a solution to all of these. And we will be able to have a runtime security in all of those contexts that we talked about in the previous slide for these workloads. We have a different deployment method. For Kubernetes, it will be daemon set, and for non-containerized or non-Kubernetes orchestrated, it will be systemd, or you can say host process. Can we move to the next slide? Now, when we look at the application development, right, starting from there, we need to understand how your application is built. And the shift left we have been hearing about a lot. What we need to what we need to bring to the table is security is always easier said than done. We all talk about shift left. We all talk about the context from runtime and how we should prioritize. But actually, to make that happen, we need to understand that a platform play is essential. You need to have a coverage of pre-deployment, at the time of deployment, during deployment, and post-deployment. All of that from one tool to make that happen. Second aspect is your ability to bring on best of the tools that are there as an integration factor, and also top it up with the prioritization in all those vulnerabilities that you detect early in the life cycle. Now, the premise is this: at no point in time, even in the shift left approach, you can say that it's vulnerability free and your application is now, which is getting deployed, has zero vulnerability. But it still holds relevance that you should do prioritization, because there is a lot of false positive and AppSec scans. And we need to identify the issues that are of importance that are deployed at runtime, and fix those things before your container images make it to the production. So SaaS, DAST, ISC, all of that become
Now,
the focus.
I'm going to interject with a question, if you
Sure.
don't mind, Gaurav. So you mentioned shift left a couple of times, and that's been a pet peeve of mine for a while. I just want to try and understand how well have teams adopted that paradigm. Um, in your experience, looking at customers and things like that, um, are people conscious about shifting security left? Are they doing a good job of it? Are they you know applying best practices and things like that? What's your general experience been?
It's still a growing, you can say, approach. It has not been to a stage where I can say confidently that even enterprise customers are actively using that. It's we are talking about that at multiple forums. There are products that can handle that. There are products questionable, but still says that they can do that. But the point is the the basic checks in the CI/CD is itself missing, which means that that's the pain. Everybody knows what needs to be done, but they don't want to do that at the cost of, let's say, the production upgrade or the deployment that they want to do. That's a, your $1 million business versus security become a hindrance kind of a problem. Your customers are waiting on a feature enhancement, and security is saying, no, you cannot ship that because of XYZ reason. And you need to serve the customer to make more money, but security gets a hit almost every time. So, what I'm seeing from my humble understanding of the market, usually people are not invoking CI/CD pipeline in its entirety itself, which means starting from code check to secrets check to SCA, SBOM, IAC, secrets detection, or you can say runtime security, all of that in entirety, let alone implementing, prioritizing the vulnerability based on the runtime context. But you can say that there are some big organization using that, but I see 60-80% of the market still very early to that. We need to understand that security scans can be overwhelming,
Got it.
and to prioritize that, we need to have
Mhm.
that approach right. We need to have vendors who can actually deliver the promise that they are making, and helping them iterate through the triaging and the remediation process real quick. That's the problem basically. And it basically takes two to tango. So vendor has to have a good solution, and the customer needs to actually adopt that. But before that, they need to have a basic security in place. So there is a lot of tug and war
Got
happening,
it.
and I don't see people mature at that level. Okay. So I think initially we talked about the pre-deployment. This is about post-deployment. But before that, any questions there, Ram?
Somebody was asking, you mentioned about false positives showing up when you do security
Mm.
scans. Somebody is just asking for any examples or details you can give about that.
False positives.
What would an example of a false positive
Yeah,
say?
great question. So false positive can be of, let's suppose you have kind of a broken access control, or kind of a, you can say some kind of a language check. Okay, let's suppose my application is built on Java, but my check is based on C++, and I'm highlighting an issue, and it is not related to my environment. I can safely say that this is not impacting, and that can be a false positive, even though that's a finding, but that's not a finding related to my environment. So at most time, it is related to the environment where the applications are built, and you have to do also, not necessarily it's a language only, which means that even if is in the same language, let's suppose C++, case in point, there might be some kind of vulnerabilities like SQLi injection that it is calling out for, and while you are going back to actually exploit that, you see that you cannot do that because the model versions are now, you can say, or maybe the packages that you're using now is updated or things of that nature. So you have to mark that false positive because it is unexploitable. Or maybe there are some auto fixes that already happened, but your scan didn't catch it. So the point is, there are some kind of efforts involved, the dev efforts, to mark that false positive, and sometimes it is inherently clear from the environment perspective also. Hope that helps.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that. Let's
Yep.
move on,
So
Gaurav.
runtime security, what we are trying to say is, there are two phases to it. Companies going about agentless approach to detect issues, like what is the identities and what is the graph, which is the relationship aspect of your human identities and the machine identities, because Kubernetes identities can be complex. So how do you understand that? All of that you can get agentless. Cluster misconfiguration, so how you should configure your worker nodes, your master nodes, that basically security misconfiguration we can highlight. CIS benchmarking. You cannot miss Kubernetes without CIS benchmarking. It's a renowned standard practice. So all of that again agentless, and ability to, like we talked about, having not just having the scans and the issues from it, but to automate it, to handle it for the remediation, is also should be the focus of the phase one. Phase two is all about zero trust, which means that now you have an agent sitting with the application as a daemon set, which means that it is able to thwart or prevent any kind of zero-day attacks like Log4j SolarWinds. And also it can help you conform to the MITRE and NIST, you can say, policies using continuous diagnostic and mitigation approach, which means that it can always ensure that your application is conformed to the best practices, and any deviation to that, it can actively block that. Now, the phase three is all about red teaming. Let's suppose you have done all of those AppSec, runtime security, zero trust. Let's understand how much your applications are secure. So you can do red teaming on your application to understand that, and that is the last approach. Now, when we say approach matters, which means that there are different approaches that we see runtime security solutions using, that are using kernel space and user space, and also sandboxing technique. Can you go ahead? Good. Okay. Sandboxing techniques. So these are some of the things that we understood before understanding that what we need to do in the context of proactive mitigation. And that's where KubeArmor came to the picture, which means that we understood that you cannot have a proactive mitigation strategy without something inline at the kernel and using something which is already there, which is Linux security modules. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Linux security modules is already there that you can leverage to actually inline mitigate the threats, and that will be effective for both user space attacks and the kernel exploits. Can we go to the next slide? So this is where it highlights your post exploit mitigation and how it is a flawed approach, because you more often than not you are thinking and having a false sense of security that your application is secure because you have a runtime security, but under the hood your runtime security might take time to respond, which means that some attacker spin up a binary to delete your files. Your file might start get deleting, and you will lose those files, or they will be able to exfiltrate those files, and then your runtime security will take an action. So how much proactive you are in runtime is also a sense of concern that we don't see much people to be asking, and we need to understand the difference. Can we go to the next slide? So what here you see is basically KubeArmor approach to a proactive runtime security, and it outlines that other open source runtime security solution leverages eBPF for proactive. What they call proactive is kind of a detect and respond model, which means that they are letting the exploit to take place and then take an action on it, because eBPF was primarily built for observability, not for enforcement or inline mitigation and all of that. What we are trying to do, a fundamental change, is understand what is happening under the hood using eBPF like everyone else, but develop policies that can sit as guardrails at LSMs and take a preventative measure before any exploit can take place. I hope that makes sense. Let's go to the next slide then. So what we are seeing here is application behavior, which means that we are able to understand your network exposures in your application. That is very essential to understand from the zero trust network access. And this is what we are showing to the users also, a kind of a threat plane to understand whether the ingress and the egress connections to your workloads, and if it is something known or unknown, they can filter by that and they can understand that and take appropriate actions on that. Can you go to the next slide? It is also important to scan those container images for vulnerability if they are stored in any registries, or if they are added to a registry. You can invoke that in your CI/CD pipeline before they are made part of the registry. These scans will outline any kind of vulnerabilities in those container images, which you can take an remedial action before they are, you can say, referenced or used uh, to build an application at runtime. Can you go to the next slide? This is how your Kubernetes identity and entitlement graph looks like. How your permissions are in you know relationally related to each other, and you can filter by exposed, you can say, unused roles or excessive permission or things of that nature. You can highlight and focus on those parts also by searching on those key queries.
So, if I may just interject here, at what stage are these things happening vis-a-vis identity? Um, in my mind, it's not essentially related to a runtime phase or a build
Correct,
time phase.
correct. Correct.
Yeah.
It's basically a static. You can say it is basically before the runtime. You would like to see a risk assessment on your application, and you can take an action on those things if there are some issues. But regardless, like on the running clusters, also it can give a view. So the action has to be taken, and we expect users to take that action before you have the application in the deployment. But you can have that visibility on runtime applications or clusters also.
Ram, there is a question in chat. Maybe you would like to.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
somebody had a question about pen testing. We'll take that towards a little towards the end, um, close to the conclusion.
Yeah, sure. So I don't want to take more time on these widgets. Basically, that highlights the capability of what we were talking about. First phase risk assessment, you get all the views of your Kubernetes. If you see IAM, secrets, data access, network access, all of that, cluster findings, CIS findings, Kubernetes findings, all of that. Can you go to the next slide? And it is about public exposures or cluster findings or privileged containers by clusters. Can you go to the next slide? I think we missed the first slide, which is talking about the metrics also. That is what is, like, you can see privileged containers, host exposure, things of that nature. That is also very important, Ram, for the application owners to understand the resource summary and the REST posture out of the box. Like they just click on this and they will be able to understand root containers, how many of them are enabled with root containers privilege, and things of that nature. Let's go to the, I think, fifth slide of the widgets. Yeah. So we have KIM widgets as well. Can we go to the next slide? CIS compliance, another one. And whatever the widgets we are showing, it's all based on risk assessment. So agentless, quick and easy, without even requiring anything. Like under 15
Mm.
minutes or so, you'll have all these dashboards. These are all agentless. Yeah. Privileged containers, workloads without network policies, privileged containers again. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So what we are trying to do is, of course, forensics is also something that we are getting asked a lot, which means that what happens if something malicious has to take place, and how can we go about back in time to understand what happened. So what we give to the user based on eBPF, a kind of a Kubernetes metadata and the kernel metadata, and stitched information with that to tell users what has happened. And it's all real time. We do aggregation at real time, so that user don't have to worry about barrage of alerts or maybe audit logs, and it can be integrated to any kind of SIM solution out there like Splunk. Can we go to the next slide? Now, important thing is these are process file network based real time events that you can capture. Can we go to the next slide? And it can also be alerts. One of the case study that we are trying to showcase is we have been ingesting these logs, and then we are trying to do a threat analysis, something like a AccuSync. It's not a full-fledged SIM, but we can. Many customers cannot afford or don't want to go for XYZ reason with Splunk. So they say that, can you do threat analytics because you are the source and which you will be feeding to Splunk. So can you do the threat analysis yourself? So pre-baked rules comes to the picture, which AccuKnox can have, which can iterate through all the logs and alert based on some rules. And these are the things we can do for the customers as well. And that's very, you can say a kind of a SOC approach. But runtime security, zero trust is all basically a step before. And it's the last step where you'll have the ultimate visibility of every threat analytics on your Kubernetes cluster when all said and done. Can we go to the next slide? Yep. So this is about MITRE Nest and how we conform to all the policies. And it's all continuous diagnostic and mitigation. So not only you will be conformed to this, any deviation, we can actively block that, and you'll still be able to be 100% MITRE compliance or NIST compliance at all times. So that's what we mean by continuous diagnostic and mitigation. And we can do that for MITRE, NIST, CIS, PCI, all of those. It's not just normal compliance or controls check. Now, some of the use cases, let's talk about Vault. What we have seen is we talked about a specific case in issue section where a workload is able to do all of the process execution. Now, does it need that? No. In general, your Vault application only requires, if you see files, there are mentioned, and then process mentioned on the right side of the YAML policy. These are the only thing it requires to run and serve its purpose, which is to store store secrets. It needs access to the process bin busy vault and bin vault, and it needs only some of the file directory access. Now, what essentially happens is user gives all sorts of permissions to the containers, and any kind of, you can say, reconnaissance or lateral movement, if an attacker, insider attacker, gets access to this pod, can do the damage. What we are trying to say is, let's limit the posture of every workload to what they are supposed to do. That means removing the capability of the attacker to run any kind of binary at runtime. For example, RMDIR, LS,
Mhm.
CAT, these are processes which your vault might not require. APT, which is package installation. Your application does not require that at runtime. So why don't we have a least permissive allow-based policy for every workload, and that AccuKnox detects automatically for every workload. Not only that, it can detect the changes in the workload and update the policy and give you a recommendation whether you want to accept or not. All of that at runtime. And that is how we are trying to go towards zero trust least permissive posture. And what we are saying is, look at the world from two perspectives. One company for runtime security can say, I have 10,000 rules. Another company can say, I have 10,200 rules. Which is better? Neither of them. Because at the end of the day, rules are subjective. And what we are trying to reach towards is a true least permissive approach where you don't even entertain anything outside of what your application is supposed to do. And that's how you encounter zero-day attacks. Okay. That's about you can
So,
say,
in
this.
the interest of time, do you want to take some questions?
Yes, let's
And
take questions and
yeah,
let's close the presentation.
so one of the ways I think people can understand Equinox and its position better is to learn about what kind of tools it replaces that are currently in vogue. So one of the questions that we have is, um, does Equinox replace all of the pen testing that's done using Burp Suite or Metasploit and things like that? So does it replace them? What's your answer to that?
We don't. We actually integrate with them and we leverage them, but it's basically early in the life cycle journey, the software life cycle. When you look at at the end of the day, when your application is deployed in the production, or maybe in the stage environment or demo environment, that time you leverage MITRE Caldera, which is an open source red teaming. that's open source. Everybody can use that. What we say is the application that AccuKnox protects, it's so much fortified that even using MITRE Caldera, which is open source, you cannot attack the application which AccuKnox is protecting. So rather, you can say analogous to any kind of red teaming solution out there, AccuKnox can protect the solution and they can try to attack it and we'll be able to secure it. But we might need a burp suit or metasploit early in the software lifecycle in CI/CD to actually do dash scanning or probably to do some OS top 10 related scanning. So we don't replace, we actually integrate with them. And that's where our flexible framework also comes to the picture for the app setting.
And sure. And you mentioned something comparing um, Tetragon and Falco and
Correct.
CubeArmor. So, are these similar use cases? Are these very distinct
Correct.
use cases?
Correct. So these are all runtime security engines, and these are all
Mhm.
open source. So when you have to see Falco, Tetragon, and basically CubeArmor, they are all in the same space of runtime security.
Yeah.
But the Equinox was very late in the journey. We had the advantage of understanding how the tech is shaping. Falco was the leaders. We wanted to integrate with Falco, but there were some fundamental challenges we saw in the approach, and that's where we thought like we have the best in breed ebpf technology that is shaping up the new way to tap into kernel telemetries and actually do some real stuff of, you can say, performance monitoring or security and all of those. Why are we relying on ebpf to do something which it is not meant for, which is security? So we let eBPF use as observability engine, and we understood that LSMs can be leveraged as a security enforcement, and that's
Okay.
where it became the inception concept for Qram.
Got it. And last question. This is also something that Tech with Pramod, one of our. Yeah, yeah, of course. I think the positioning is clear vis-a-vis Falco versus Cube Armor versus Tetragon and things like that. So I was going to bring up this last question, which is something that I empathize with and resonate with a lot. As an open source enthusiast, how much of what you showed is available in open source Cube Armor versus how much in AccuKnox as a product? Can you speak to that?
So yeah, sure. The policy enforcement is same for Equinox also as it is for CubeArmor. We don't have a several maybe separate fork of that. We leverage the same. But the auto generation of the policy, the behavioral change of the workload and updating the policy is not there with CubeArmor.
Okay. Okay.
With that being
Um,
said, we are open to support anyone .com, and this part, CubeArmor support, we also have a Slack channel. You can join us there and we can help you there. Many organizations are using that and we can help you with that.
cool. I think there was a last minute question about model armor versus cube armor. I think the distinction there is model armor expands to a lot more AI native entities and artifacts versus cube armor assumes Kubernetes as a primitive and sort of focuses there. Um,
Correct.
so I think there's some sessions in future, Ravi, if you're watching. Um, so you should definitely um, tap into these sessions in the upcoming days, and there'll be more clarity, I guess, between the two tools.
Thanks for the
Somebody,
question.
yeah, somebody has a question about Falco. What is the Falco application and what does it do?
It's a runtime security engine that has several rules that can safeguard your application. but we talked about rules-based approach and a zero trust approach, which is least permissive posture. Those two are different. While open source rules-based approach for your Kubernetes might be a good start, but it's not the end of the road. So we'll have to look at that perspective.
Yeah, Crystal, thanks for the question. Hopefully that made sense to you. Falco defines a bunch of different rules and things like that in my experience, and Cube Armor goes a little bit of the extra mile in doing some additional things in terms of ensuring zero trust and verifying the identity of all of the things. And I guess technically you could do that in Falco, but it's very sort of um, convoluted as opposed to being more straightforward with Cube Armor. Um, yeah, sorry for going the extra 10 minutes, but I think it was a very useful 10 minutes for all those who are watching. Thank you so much, Gaurav, for taking the time. I think the community has to be very grateful for all your efforts as a product manager in building so many wonderful things as part of the Cube Armor toolchain, but also AccuKnox as a product and as a platform that handles so many use cases, but um, doesn't necessarily leave a few gaps for other users. I think with AI coming, you've really got your hands full in adding a lot of other areas in terms of workloads, in terms of workload types, and other things. So yeah, thanks for doing such a wonderful job of building such a comprehensive tool, and giving us that security platform experience that's so complete and so good in terms of coverage.
Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for all the questions, viewers. We'll have